Well, hey there. It is 1:30. The governor finished his budget address about an hour ago, proposing $55.2 billion in spending. We thought we'd hop on and react with you all this afternoon. We're pleased to welcome former state representative Tom Demmer with us this afternoon. Tom, how are you?
I'm great, Patrick. How about you?
Thanks for taking some time. In the interest of bipartisanship, I had a Democrat former legislator lined up to join us today, but they bailed on us this morning, and I couldn't find a replacement at short notice. So it's just you and me today, Tom. But we're the cool kids, so we're gonna enjoy this. So I have a quiz for you, Tom. Do you remember what the state budget general revenue fund expenditure was your first year in the legislature in FY13?
Probably 34 billion.
29.4 billion.
Oh my gosh.
FY19, Pritzker's first budget, right? That's when he would have taken office during FY19.
That was at 40?
38.5 billion. This year, the current budget, 53.1 billion. The governor's proposed budget for FY26, $55.4 billion. Sooner or later, it's real money, right? I mean, this is. I've got a lot of thoughts, and I want to give you the floor here because we've got a limited time this afternoon. But I feel like we have to start with the growth in spending in the state, because it's in good times and bad, we're still just spending more and more.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, that was one of the things that we talked about quite a bit as previous year's budgets were debated, is it's sometimes easy and tempting to look at a budget just in one year's isolation and say, as long as we can get through this year, we'll figure out our other problems later on. Well, the reality is those problems come back at some point. At some point you get to that bridge and you've got to decide how you're going to cross it. That's what we see in a year like this, where we start to see a little bit of uncertainty in our revenue forecasts. Maybe we're not seeing the kind of growth that we had seen in previous years. Maybe some federal funding sources dry up, and you end up having to reckon with the fact that the decisions that you made over the last several budgets are still in play in this budget. The new program you started, the funding that you brought into expand funding someplace else and built that into the base, those are still there this year. And those are the problems that we're reckoning with this year. It's not policy decisions that are being made right now, for the most part, that are affecting the budget outlook. It's policy decisions that were made over the last couple of years. That's what's brought us to the brink of, being really kind of at a decision point about what to do with it.
So I found it really interesting, and I kind of teed off on this on the radio this morning, maybe to the point that I was being a little bit of a jerk about it, which is nothing new for me. But it was really surprising how over the last few months since November, right, when Gombe put out its revenue estimate, which I understand isn't a perfect revenue estimate, has never been perfectly accurate, but it's at least a baseline for the time. We went from talking about a $3.2 billion deficit in November to all of a sudden last night, we're hearing, it's not so bad. We've got money. I mean, how does that happen?
Well, the forecast from last fall was based on an older S&P economic forecast. They've updated that through December. But I think this is one of those points that I certainly came to appreciate in the legislature. And that's, we start having these discussions several months before the budget actually passes. And in that time, a lot can change in the world. A lot can change in the economy. We get additional data at the state level about what our actual collections are relative to what our forecasts were. But yeah, the projection that happens, last fall is not going to be the same as what we end up seeing at 3 a.m. when this budget ends up passing in the end of May.
So you, Tom, was a state representative for 10 years from the Dixon area, and generally regarded by folks on both sides as a thoughtful and decent guy when it comes to state finances and a solid voice on these things. So, Tom, I want to give you the floor first, since we just hit these two big topics. What was your reaction to what you heard from the governor today? Because this is a tough budget, right? There's no way around that. He admitted that, right? And he admittedly had some I thought reassuring things to say, that if you're going to come to me with more spending, you need to identify cuts. Can't get Republicans in Congress to do that sometimes. I mean, there were some good things, there were some bad things for sure, no matter which side of the aisle you're on. What was your overall take from what you're seeing in this budget package?
Well, first of all, I think it's good news when we see revenue collections were higher than expected. It means that maybe the economic performance is a little better than expected, means that people are earning more money, corporations are earning more money, that there's maybe a little bit better economic activity. So I always welcome those upward revisions and projections. You should be cautious projecting it, and then grateful when a little bit of good news comes in. But you can't bank on that. You can't just say, oh, the deficit projection today, I'm sure it'll be taken care of by a revised forecast later on. It can cut both ways. Sometimes that revision can go the other direction, and maybe collections are lower than what we expected. So you really can't pin your hopes on that. But when it happens, that's a positive thing. I was a little concerned by the other methods of closing the gap this year. As I talked about, the spending decisions over the last couple of years are really what's the upward pressure on the budget this year. It's the spending that's been built into new programs, expanded programs over the last several years is putting the most pressure on this budget. And a couple of the ways that they propose filling that gap this year, the delinquent tax incentive program to try to sort of make a one-time collection of delinquent taxes, the 1-year pause on shifting sales taxes on motor fuels from the general fund into the road fund. That's a one-time deal that helps out. It's really dangerous to try to pay for ongoing structural spending by doing one-time revenue solutions. I know that maybe there wasn't a lot left that they could go to. I mean, you look at the last few budget cycles, even with a lot of additional federal dollars coming in, the governor and Democrats used a lot of those sort of low-hanging fruit, maybe raising the tax on sports gaming or tweaking a corporate tax piece that average people didn't notice. And so it was kind of easier politically to get done. Several of those things have happened over the last couple of years. So there maybe aren't a lot of options left for them on how to close this, but to go to something like a 1-year pause and a transfer or a one-time collection of delinquent taxes, boy, that just means, next year's battle could be even more challenging if you don't pay additional attention to trying to reduce the spending side.
If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, go ahead and drop us a comment or a question. This one, Miles Mendoza, how will Indiana's merger with downstate Illinois counties improve those citizens' taxes, and how will that impact the budget? Considering my home county, Iroquois County, along the Indiana border, is one of the 7 that has passed a non-binding resolution to leave the state. Let me be clear that nobody's going anywhere. This isn't real. It's just I don't know if Todd Houston, the speaker in Indiana, is trying to get himself on Chicago TV or something, or if he's trying to be a troll, but this isn't real. So and if you think about it, Indiana's income tax burden isn't significantly better than it is in Illinois, because in most Indiana counties, there's a county income tax on top of the Indiana state income tax. So, in places like Lake County, Indiana, you're actually paying a higher income tax than you are in Illinois. Property taxes are gigantically lower in Indiana, and certainly the cost of living and those sort of things are better. But that's not a real proposal, and I don't think anyone actually thinks it is. I'll get to the one about blaming Trump and Nazis and that sort of thing, because there was an interesting amount of Nazi talk in the speech today, more than you would expect. One thing I wanted to hit on with you, Tom, and I apologize for my voice. I'm still getting over the flu. I've already done 3 hours of live radio this morning, so I'm hanging on by a thread, baby. The thing Republicans have been hitting Pritzker on more than anything else in recent months has been spending on undocumented immigrants, specifically the health insurance for for undocumented, illegal, whichever term you want to use, which for the HIA for the adults, it's age 42 to 64 or whatever it is. Incredibly expensive program for a Medicaid style health insurance, which really isn't that great of a health insurance anyway. They tried to institute some copays last year, didn't really clean anything up or really help any much because it was very minute. And the governor proposes cutting that program completely, zeroing it out today for FY26. That's not to say it's a done deal because he's going to get a huge pushback from parts of the legislature. But I'm interested, especially since it's Republicans that have been raising the alarm on that. I'm interested in your thoughts on that, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we could afford the program when they instituted it. One of the things we pointed out about that program, unlike other parts of Medicaid, you don't get a federal match on spending for undocumented adults or seniors. And so that was entirely born out of the state's general revenue fund. All but a tiny fraction of it was born out of the state's general revenue fund. Again, we couldn't afford that then. We can't afford it now. I think the governor has finally come around to understanding that was the case all along. I would note that there is still $130 million or so in this proposed budget to keep that benefit in for seniors. So the 42 to 64 population has been phased out, but they maintain the current enrollment in the senior population. That's 120 some million dollars of state general revenue fund that we're still spending on a program like that. I think you have to pay attention to some of those spending decisions where, again, unlike the normal Medicaid program where we're getting, more than half of our costs paid, we were paying virtually every dollar for that population, and it was incredibly expensive. And it was one of those policy decisions that led to billions of dollars in spending over the last couple of years that we couldn't afford.
You were a House Republican budgeteer, so you were in the room, as much as Republicans were allowed in the room, and maybe more in your time than currently, or at least in the last couple of years. For the folks that don't know Pritzker's team, Pritzker's staff, for people who don't know Andy Minar and Alexis Sturm and Caprera and the people who are in the room doing the negotiating like that, I think there are misconceptions at times about what their priorities are, because the governor is very much a progressive, right? He is not hidden that fact, but they're also, I think it's safe to say they're concerned, at least maybe it's lip service. You can tell me about making sure the budget is balanced. And, I was a reporter in the Blagojevich years. It was a disaster when they just made up numbers out of thin air. The Quinn years were a disaster at times. What's it like in the room when you're in a budget negotiation, and what does the governor's team actually prioritize?
Well, that's a big question. I would say that I think they're a smart and talented group of people. They try to get their facts right. Of course, as you mentioned, you come into those negotiations having a goal or an objective in mind. I think they've overseen the expansion, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, an expansion pretty significant. Over almost $15 billion. That the annual budget has grown since they took office. So, there's certainly accommodating of increases there. They've taken some common sense steps, I think, in trying to grow the rainy day fund. That's a good idea. Understanding that, with some of the proposals that come in, there's only so far you can go. So that's always a little bit of a give and take. But, I think they come in, try to do the right thing. And then you have to negotiate with 177 members of the legislature and you figure out kind of how everything shakes down from there. I do think, if we've looked at the last couple of years and you think about some of the speeches the governor's given in these budget addresses, I think sometimes they're a little heavy-handed when talking about people who have different ideas or maybe are warning of different things. You think of some of the governor's quotes about doom grifters.
I tweeted this.
Or whatever.
I tweeted the lines. Let me find them.
Whatever all those things were, I think we look back now, and some of those warnings that we were giving at the time, well, they've come true. We're starting to have to adjust to some of that reality. So, they need to be careful. They're not taking a political approach to every negotiation that happens, even if part of the job is inherently political.
Yeah, are you a carnival barker, a doom grifter, a spelunker of misery, or a backseat bellyacher?
Yes,
I don't
right.
know.
And that was from
How do you identify,
people
Tom?
delivering warnings about exactly what we're dealing with today.
It's also, I mean, I think it's a good reminder that this is a starting point, and the legislature has generally in the last few years gone along with the governor. We've had some holdups and some issues, mostly inside Democratic infighting. But you were on the House floor for many years, and you've seen the way that caucus has evolved from essentially it was a lot of just Mike Madigan's middle of the road Democrats there to keep a Democrat majority. It has become an incredibly progressive caucus. And we saw last year it was 4:30 in the morning when they finally got the tax increase passed. How hard is it going to be for Democrats to keep it all together, especially if they're, I mean, you're going to have the Latino caucus to deal with over the health insurance for undocumented. You're going to have progressives that want to spend more. You're going to have moderates that want to cut more. Just on the Democratic side, even with zero Republican input, it's going to be a slog. It's going to be a haul to pass this or anything.
Yeah, it's absolutely going to be a challenge. And that's, the legislature is where the budget really has to get made. And I would point out too, not just the direct negotiations that are going to be part of this budget, but there's also a long season of passing a lot of substantive bills that could have a fiscal impact. And you've got to decide, do we account for that in the budget? Do we delay the implementation and just buy ourselves a little bit of time and, maybe a rate increase that doesn't take effect till later on in the year? But yeah, those policy decisions that have a fiscal impact on the House floor, a lot of times those bills don't get the scrutiny they deserve. And then it comes to budget time and you say, well, we passed this bill that requires us to do this. Now we got to go find the money to pay for
it. I know we got to get you out of here in a few minutes. You've got another meeting, but Phil Cook writes us, blame Trump. I'm a Nazi, blah, blah, blah. He says, I plan on leaving the state. It's a train wreck. There was actually a stat that we were talking about the Speaker of the House in Indiana with the secession bill, but he cited a stat, and I haven't verified it. So don't hold me to this, but said 100,000 people have moved from Illinois to Indiana since the pandemic. That was their number. I don't know whether it's real, but it was certainly interesting that the governor took such an inflammatory tone. You knew he was going to criticize Donald Trump, and the way Elon Musk and Doge and all of that thing are taking a hatchet to government in often an unconstitutional way, should be concerning to everyone, regardless of party. But he really doubled down on the authoritarian Nazi comparisons. Not a guy seemingly interested in building any bridges in Springfield, right?
Well, we pointed out some of the more hyperbolic comments that the governor's made over the last couple of years too. Maybe he just directed a little bit more of his ire towards DC instead of under the dome this year. But, I think there's important policy decisions, important budget decisions that have to be made this year. These are things that are within the state of Illinois' control. These are our responsibility. I don't know that, using this as just a chance to take pot shots at DC is really a productive use of time.
He's running for president, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. What's your advice for your fellow Republicans to be a part of the process here? They've generally been shut out, especially, Noreen Hammond has, I don't know that she's even gotten in a room when John Gordon Booth was running the budget. Maybe it'll be better with Cam Buckner, because I think Republicans have a better relationship with Cam than they did with John Gordon in general. How do Republicans remain relevant in this environment?
And look, I think we need to stick to the things that we've been talking about: fiscal responsibility, concern about cost of living, what's the tax burden on Illinois residents. Some years Democrats completely dismiss those concerns out of hand. And then this year you see that a lot of them are including those very concerns in the statements that they put out today. So I think Republicans have been right on the issue of trying to keep in check the growth in spending, trying to be sensitive about the cost of living and the tax burden on Illinois residents, put out priorities around those kinds of things. And, if Democrats aren't going to adopt them this year, sooner or later, they'll come around to the wisdom of those concepts.
Tom Demmer, former state representative, spent 10 years in the House. Can't imagine why you wouldn't want to be there anymore. Appreciate your time, Tom, and thank you for watching, everyone. Wanted to just jump on and get a quick reaction to the speech today, and share some thoughts with you from Tom, and get some perspective here, so that we have a little better context to what we heard from the governor today. So, Tom, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Patrick.
All right. I'm not going to sit around here and monologue with you, especially as I'm continuing to fight losing a voice. But all I'll say is that a reminder that this is a starting point for the budget. This is not the end point, and it's going to change a lot between now and May. And what the governor said today is a blueprint, but what they'll be voting on theoretically at 3 a.m. in late May is going to look a lot different. So we'll continue to follow all of that, keep an eye on all of that, and continue to keep folks updated. So subscribe to our newsletter at theillinoize.com and become a paid subscriber. Get political intel every day in your inbox, and we'll continue to keep you updated on the situation as politics comes into play and the legislature continues to do their thing. Thanks for joining us this afternoon here on the Illinoize. Take care, everyone.